Hello everyone, welcome. Today's video will be focusing on Genshin Impact and both the pros and cons of its way of storytelling. Now, if you're new to the channel, my name is Shikai. I primarily discuss character lore and story analysis, but I will also be doing gameplay videos very soon, so if any of that interests you, consider subscribing. Now, in terms of Genshin Impact, I will say that Genshin tries two methods of storytelling. The first is environmental. It's very much Dark Souls-like. You have the world of Dragonspine, for instance, Guyun Stone Forest, you have the Gorge in Inazuma, you have Surumi Island, you have Seri Island, you have Enkonomiya and Watatsumi Island. You have all these different islands, and even the chasm in Liyue. All of these contribute to not only explaining the landscape, the archons, different battles that may have taken place, but subsequently all of them assist in providing more world building for the power of the archons themselves, just how much they shaped the landscape around them. Now this is, in essence, fine. I think a lot of individuals enjoy that way of storytelling. They enjoy seeing this because it does really help elaborate and show the archons' different powers, their abilities, and their strength. I have no issue with this. Genshin, in my opinion, excels in environmental storytelling. Now, Genshin also has weapon-based storytelling, and if, let's say, you have a weapon like the Skyward Harp or Elegy for the End, you get different tidbits of lore. Skyward Harp gives you lore on Barbados and Dvalin, and that's lore you might not otherwise have. It doesn't matter as much, but it's still there. Whereas Elegy for the End gives you lore and more information on Senora the Fatui Harbinger and the Crimson Witch of Flames overall. And it's decent lore. None of this is impactful or integral, but it does help build a further picture of the game itself. And that same method, it has books, it has artifact sets, you have character stories, you have character profiles, you have mini quests, you have item descriptions. There is lore packed into everything. An example of another game that vaguely does this is something like Skyrim, in which you have so many books that you can't possibly read them all. But outside of that, the weapons don't matter, they don't have lore, the armor doesn't usually have lore to it, so you only actively need to seek out the books. Now Genshin has an archive, and you have bosses, you have so many different avenues for lore that in most ways you would usually think that the lore is hidden in the world itself, but it's not. Genshin presents its story to you via, in most cases, the storyline quests, archon quests, the character quests, and subsequently Paimon. Now, this is where the storytelling starts to fall apart a bit, because if you dedicate yourself to lore and world building in the sense where it's not directly put in front of you, but it's there, then the player who actively chooses to seek that out knows what they're getting into and knows the avenues they have to find and discuss and discover the lore itself. It's why Dark Souls works well. Because the world doesn't tell you everything, you go and look for it. And because you're seeking that out, and because developers know that this is their intended method of storytelling, they can put all the efforts and all the cards into the world itself, into the environment, into the weapons, the, essentially anything, the armor sets. And you have to put those pieces together yourself. Genshin doesn't do that. Genshin halfway does it, but then it halfway hides its story in events that never come back. You have Perilous Trial, which is the Zhao and Yelan questline, which elaborates on the Yaksha. You have the Albedo questline. There are so many different quests that lock off really important bits of the story and world that if you're a new player and maybe don't interested in lore-based channels, you aren't going to experience that. Even then, Genshin takes the Arknight approach, where it will info dump and explain everything in one go in essentially one big 2 or 3 paragraph amount of text, where you have a character talking for like 5 minutes, Paimon repeating, and that's it. And that isn't a good way of storytelling. An example is that I have found is a decent way of alluding to certain things is when you're doing the Zhongli Archon quest and you have to go to Dada Upa Gorge in Mondstadt. One of the things he says is that he had an old friend who used to bring him wine from the Land of Wind. And this correlates to the fact that Barbados or Venti used to bring Morax or, Zhongli wine from Mondstadt when they would meet every so often. Now, this doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, but it doesn't necessarily, and it happens, in my opinion, it happens in a way in which once you're nearing the quest objective, you aren't stopped, you aren't put out of gameplay. The character just talks, and that it's it. It doesn't impede you in any way. Genshin has a problem where it wants you to sit still for 5 to 10 minutes to where it dumps a bunch of lore onto you and then expects you to understand it. And that's not the way this works. The cutscenes, in my opinion, are really good. Those are nicely animated. Those are pretty decent overall at conveying information. It's the problem where it has a static camera angle, 2 characters standing still, or maybe 3 and 4, and it'll just pop between them. Oh hey, now you're looking at Ito, now you're looking at Xiao, now there's Yelan, now there's the Traveler, and that's it. That, in my opinion, pulls you out of gameplay. If Genshin wants to tell its story through artifacts, weapons, items, and the world, then it should do that. If it wants to tell its story in books, then it should do that. If it wants to tell its story through books and the story, it should do that. But trying to put all this world building that would realistically should be built up in a series format, where the first game would theoretically introduce the topics, the second game expands on it, and the third game expands further, it's trying to do that all in too many ways, in too short of time, in too small of a game. You can't put a very, very important plot point like the fact that the Fantastic Company exists, or what happened to Convia with the events of the Cataclysm. You can't put that in an event because that's important. That is incredibly important to the game itself. And Genshin fails. It fails at telling you a cohesive story. Because you can't go back and watch cutscenes, sure, but you can go back and look at the archive. But if you look at the archive, you still get the info dump of text. If you are a new player, you don't get the original event quest lines. You're missing out on context now. If you don't have a 5-star weapon, you don't learn about the lore of certain units and certain interactions between characters. If you don't have the characters, you don't learn about their background as much because there's no quest that really delves into their background as much as it should. I think the closest thing we got to a background delve was Eula's questline. But even then, it didn't elaborate a lot more on her character as a whole. It elaborates on like 2 or 3 aspects, and that's it. Even Ganyu's quest kind of failed to do that. Zhongli's showcased history, but the Archon quests, the Archon character quests, are supposed to and usually do showcase more history. But Genshin, in my opinion, has good premise. It has good lore if you look for it. It has a good story if you look for it to a degree. I will go more in depth on that later on. But Genshin fails to convey that to the player. And because of that factor, you shouldn't be required to go out, find a lore channel, watch a 30-minute video to understand what happened to Raiden or what happened to Zhao. The game should be able to tell you that, and if it can't, that's a problem. Genshin spreads stuff too thin. I think having lore for weapons is fine, having 5-star weapons is fine, but when you start putting critical amounts of effort and lore and story building behind either paywalls like the 5-star weapons, event and player-based walls like the events themselves such as Perilous Trial, or you start hiding them in so many different ways that it's almost impossible for somebody to know and competently understand all of it on their own, and then you have to reevaluate what you do. But that's just my opinion. Yours could be different. I know some people prefer the cutscenes or the books or the lore and artifacts and weapon descriptions. That's perfectly fine. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Tell me in the comment section. My name has been Shikai. If you've enjoyed this video, leave a like down below, consider subscribing, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.